What's up, wrestling fans, trading card collectors? Welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Cards. Today we've got Corey, who many of you may know him as Apocalypse Cards on Instagram. I've been following Corey for a while now, but I was really inspired by his talk on Brett McGrath's podcast, Stacking Slabs. And after that episode a few months back, we've been trying to coordinate an interview because I knew he had a lot that would help out the wrestling card community, and I had to get him on. I wanted to further dive into his mindset when it comes to sports cards and the correlation with wrestling cards, and what's some pros and cons of both, how to put together interesting, fun PCs, and a lot more great nuggets of information for the collecting community. We're going to skip over his origin story today, and I want to recommend you go back and listen to that episode on the Stacking Slabs podcast that Corey was on. I want to say it was episode 254, but Corey talked about a lot how he got into the hobby. And I wanted to just jump straight to wrestling cards in this episode. And again, if you're not already, what are you doing? Go check out Brett McGrath and the Stacking Slabs podcast. A lot of great information you can take there, even if it's just with sports cards or collecting in general, and apply that to wrestling cards. But I'm not wasting any more time. Let's jump into the conversation today with Corey, Apocalypse Cards. What's up, everybody? We've got Corey, Apocalypse Cards, finally on the show today. We had to jump through some hoops, mostly on my part, probably because of my wild schedule, but happy to have you on. Thanks for taking the time to come on here and talk to everybody.
Well, no, thank you so much for having me. I've been really excited. Fan of what you do,
Thank you.
fan of your collection and what you stand for in this hobby. So I'm really excited to be here to talk today.
Well, thanks for the kind words. And speaking of kind words, I'm not going to dive too much into your origin story because I don't want to kind of spoil what Brett did on his podcast. I believe it's episode 254 of the Stacking Slabs podcast. So if you want to hear all the backstory of how Corey got into cards and all of that stuff, make sure to go check. What are you guys doing? Why are you not checking out the Stacking Slabs podcast already? Brett does a great job on everything he does. So we are going to start with, though, how you got into wrestling cards. Like, just pick up from that moment, whenever that was, and just kind of talk about your entrance into this segment of the hobby.
Sure, absolutely, and a good question. For me, I had been a sports card collector for 25 years, started when I was a kid, and what had happened, with COVID and the way the world was kind of going, sports card market blew up, everything blew up, Everybody's having fun. And then I found myself after, a year and a half having fun, selling cards, but I felt myself just rushing to buy and find the next Kobe Bryant card, the next Michael Jordan, the next, whatever was in line. And I kind of stumbled. I had followed a few guys on Instagram, guys like Drake, Drake's PC, big shout out, awesome follow. Guy, Peyton Manning collector and things like this. And then all of a sudden, sitting next to it's a really pretty Hulk Hogan card. And, when I was a kid collecting, the classic sets from WWE were the rage, right? Like getting all those no inserts and stuff like that. So I found myself getting back into it, asking questions, reaching out to the community about wrestling cards. This was probably, I would say, like mid 2021.
Okay.
Right. Mid 2021, and about 6 months prior to that, probably towards the end of 2020, I started picking up, 1987 Topps Bret Hart rookie card, going through the pop reports, finding what's rare, the things, that we've always done. And I kind of started to stumble into not only the fandom that is, there's nothing like it. In terms of wrestling, right? If it's in you, it's in you.
Right.
And if it's not, that's okay, but you still have to tip your hat to it, right? This is a travesty to some, but I'm not a Bruce Springsteen fan, right?
Me neither. I can't stand the guy.
Can't stand it, right? But my friends that do, hey, to each their own.
Right.
I'm not, right. So I understand that aspect. And as I started to dig more, the other side to it was the collector. And the collector in me started to realize how rare and how short printed wrestling cards were in comparison to what I had been collecting more heavily. So it was kind of this mix of the card collector in me with the WWE fandom as you know, an Attitude Era kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once you see a rock gold refractor, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
right.
That's it. So it was kind of like that mesh that got me into it, and what kept me in was the community. I think that the wrestling card community is terrific. I think the one thing we don't get often enough is to control our own narrative with what it's all about. So that's
Yeah.
why I'm very appreciative, like what you do, and
Thank you.
some others out there. So yeah, that's pretty much how I got in.
So, coming from the background of sports cards, this is
Mhm.
something I have pushed at nauseum on this, on the podcast, anything I can get, is the parallels. But the parallels and the differences that people need to understand from being successful in sports cards and what people want, how that pertains to wrestling, and then some stuff maybe in wrestling that is different than sports cards that applies to wrestling collectors, and maybe it's something that isn't as valuable or sought after on the surface, and wrestling actually is more than that equivalent of the sports card, if that makes sense. So what is some differences you've seen coming in for, and what's some pros, cons, any way you want to go with that?
It's a great question, and one that really doesn't get examined enough, right? Like, what is it for a sports card collector? Or hey, let's throw it all out there. TCG,
Yep.
Pokemon, right? And I've said this before, and I want to be trepidatious in how I say it, right? But there's a fine line between sports cards, TCG, boxing, wrestling, UFC. Like, you know, we know that there's kind of this minutia to each thing. But in terms of cards, you know, if you're a wrestler, or if you're just a card collector, right, and you like gold refractors, gold
Yep.
prisms, tie dyes, on card autos, you don't mind sticker autos, you want big patches, wrestling has it. There's
Yep.
nothing you can't find. That's the power of Panini's licensing agreement so far. Panini has taken it into not modern wrestling, ultra modern collecting. You can get, I personally, I'm not a big patch relic collector, but wrestling's changing that. It's, you know, the fact that you can get a piece of, I just saw the other day one pop up a nice edge,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like a piece of his piece of his shirt or his pants. Well, if you watch wrestling and you understand the pageantry of wrestling, that's cool. That
Right.
is a multiple colored patch that no NBA jersey will ever provide you, or no cleat from a football card will ever provide you. You know, it has everything that you want to find in collecting. And even before Panini, you know, I think Topps Chrome, for the few years, the information people don't have on wrestling is what'll blow their minds, right?
Oh
And the
yeah,
fact,
and it's like every day we're finding more and more, because wrestling is unlike anything else where you can't just, like, sure, you can go to wrestlingtradingcards.com or Cardboard Connection, you can find the checklist, but then there's all these other things behind those that nobody's maybe to this day still knows.
I think you're right. And I think what we haven't had in the wrestling card community that we have in the broad card collecting community is the sleuths, right? Like we you know, you if you follow cards, guys like Spinatron,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, all great guys, so valuable, Rodney and all of those guys, they're fantastic for the hobby. And there's been a microscope under you know, the cards and the parallels and the inserts and the sets in sports for so long. Not the case with wrestling, but not because no one cared. You know, there's a strong parallel, I think. This is, some people may say you're crazy, but between wrestling cards and basketball cards. Now,
Okay,
let me
I want to hear this take.
here's the take. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, I was not alive, but I know plenty of collectors that were, certainly collect a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't a lot of basketball card collectors. And the reason is the NBA had issues with their licensing on and off throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And it wasn't until the 1990s when Topps finally officially started printing licensed NBA product on a consistent basis. I believe it's like 1991, 1992.
Sounds about right, yeah.
And they did so until 2009. So before that, Topps had a set in 1969 and 1970, 1971, not 72, 73, 74. You know, like it jumps around a lot. And that's kind of what happened in wrestling.
Yep.
Now, 1986 Fleer changed everything, not when it came out.
Right.
When 1986 Fleer basketball came out, that was the packs on the shelves that nobody wanted. Basketball didn't really become big until Michael Jordan in the 90s, and then it slowed until the LeBron era again.
Yep.
Wrestling's very similar. Wrestling also, WWF and WWE have had licensing agreement, not necessarily issues, but just different pathways that they've gone over time. WWE was probably first in line to give things like Prism stickers, Panini stickers, the Merlin products, playing cards, things like that are where they typically sent their licensing agreement to. So the mixture for that is that you have 4 Topps Chrome sets in the entirety of wrestling.
Period.
And now, right? 4. That's it. There's 4. And they jump around. You have 2014, 2015, 2020, 2021.
And then if you want to debate it, you've got that heritage that has the chrome, but it's heritage. So
I consider it chrome. I consider it chrome because it has the emblem.
Right.
Right. That's what I say. But you're right, because that's the case.
That's the first set that had superfractors.
It's the first wrestling superfractors, and they continued it in like 05, 06, 07 through like 2008 or whatever. And then now the newer ones are foil fractors, is what they call them in the newer wrestling products. But I think that's a very strong point that people need to understand is, Hulk Hogan has 1 Topps Chrome gold refractor. 1. That means that there's 50 Hulk Hogan gold refractors.
Yep.
That's it. So I think people see what the market is everywhere else and how diluted everything's. They don't understand that wrestling is still a pure market. It's still, and you can't change it. Topps lost its licensing with them, right? So it's on the Panini, and we could talk about that too, how it's transitioned into ultra modern. Right. But I think that parallel is very interesting, because where they come together and where it's a good thing is it leads to shorter printed, smaller availability, harder to find. Condition finds are hard because it was, it's one of those, right? And you toss it in a pile. And that's what happened in 1980s basketball, the 70s basketball, when it came in and came out. And wrestling's kind of the same way. Not to mention, when they did, is an important thing, when they did come out in 2014, started producing Topps Chrome sets, they are some of the shortest printed base sets in the history of sports cards. There has been some sleuthing, and some have said that they believe there are less than 250 cases produced of 2014 Topps Chrome.
It's crazy when you think about it.
Right?
Yeah.
That's probably what one local card shop goes through in a couple months. A good card shop goes through. They probably come close to that. So it's a wild thing to think about, that a base card, and pop reports don't lie, right?
Right.
So you can see it clear as day. If you have a card that's been graded, there's been 50 copies that's not a vintage card. If there's 50 copies graded of a WWE card, that's unheard of. It's usually less than 20, less than 10.
Yeah, because just think of some of those may still be in wax. Some of them may be locked up in PCs in, mags that are never going to get graded and never see the light of day. So
you're right.
Out of something that's 50, there may actually only be like 15.
And I think you're right along that lines. And again, for years, without being recognized with much monetary value in the hobby until the last few years, I think a lot of it got tossed to the side, thrown in a box, was in the thing that got donated, the box that mom threw out, things like that they may never be seen again.
Right. So are there any cons that you've seen coming into wrestling cards, like within the maybe it's the cards released, maybe it's the community's reaction to something. Like, what is something that kind of sports card world has over going for them over wrestling cards?
Sure. So I will say, I'll throw a pro in too. I'll say the pro first. One thing I didn't get to say, one of the powers of wrestling cards is that you don't have, well, you kind of have it in sports, but not many people, you see them, but team collectors, right? Well, in wrestling, you can faction collect.
Oh yeah.
I love to build factions in my collection. So like if I get a Bret Hart card, I have to try to find, either a Shawn Michaels to feud them in my collection, or when Select came out, the Anvil had got a card.
Jimmy Hart.
You got the Bret Hart, you got Jim Neidhart, then you could put the British Bulldog, and you'll even throw a manager in there. So I've got Jimmy Hart. So you have the whole faction built. I think that is one of the most fun things you can do that people could go nuts with. It's just so much fun. The cons, I would say, for wrestling is we've moved through the phase, in my opinion, of novelty, right? It's not a novelty anymore.
Yeah.
There's a Prism set, right? It's not a novelty anymore. Once Panini Prism has been made, it's not really a novelty anymore. But we're still, as a community, there's not. I'll give you a perfect example. In sports cards, the debate of vintage versus modern died a long time ago.
Yep.
And by died, I don't mean that some aren't this and some aren't that. That's fine.
Or both.
That's what I think happened, is a lot became both. Because over time, Griffey collectors for baseball realized, oh, well, who did he love? Right? Who was, he loved Hank Aaron was, so collecting kind of transcends that. I think now, as wrestling is learning and everybody starts, once things gain traction in this hobby, everybody starts worrying about money. It all becomes about money. What's going to be worth this and let that go. If you're not having fun in this, don't do it, because I guarantee you'll be the last money in and the first money out. We've seen it for years and years and years. So with that said, I think we're wrestling collectors are starting to, understand that their narrative is their own. It doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be different, but there's still too much of like that infighting, of not realizing that, like, hey, we're just wrestling collectors. Let's have fun with this thing. You don't like the new stuff because there's 50 different parallels of the same card. Get it? Justified. You don't like vintage because they weren't pack pulled. You cut them out of a magazine that people subscribe to, and a couple people have all of them. Fine. Justified. No big deal. The truth is the collector who tends to win when it comes to the money is somebody that has it all. Right. So and that's like, again, the guys, if you buy stock, you buy your stock and you buy the competitor's stock, right? Because it's betting with the house, but you're hedging a bet too. So I think that's what it is. There's too much of that still going on, where people are attacking the sale prices or wondering where the money should go. That's not up to the person that owns the card. That's up to the person who buys the card. Something's only worth as much as somebody's willing to pay for it. So we can argue any of that. And as of now, in my opinion, wrestling is still void of too much influencers putting their opinions. It's still collectors, proven collectors, that are talking about it. The only issue is non-wrestling guys like to talk about wrestling cards, right? They love to hate on it. We've seen it a million times.
Yeah, and going back to your point, I think some of the infighting and opinions, it's personal bias and narrative driven, and that's what it's all based on, instead of going back to saying, okay, like, I'm a big, just say you're a big John Cena fan, and you can like all of the stuff across the board, instead of saying, well, I just like his Prism stuff, or I just like his Topps Chrome stuff. And you can take that into the vintage, into the 90s, into whatever you want. And it's just, I think it's like I said, the personal narrative instead of like respecting the card for what it is. So if you like the 82 All-Stars, but that's all you like, well, I don't understand, because you made a valid point about the gold prisms that maybe puts that in the grand scheme of things, dare I say, above the 82 All-Stars from a rarity perspective. Not a value perspective, but rarity. But then you also have all these other things that Hogan is in. So if you're like, that's just a great point you put out. Like, if you're a true collector, a true fan of the talent, you'd be getting everything.
It's the process.
Yep.
It's the process of collecting. And that's what I think, at least for me, starting on the outside and working my way in, the first wrestling card I bought, the first three I bought was an 87 Topps Bret Hart, an 82 All-Star Andre the Giant, and maybe a 85 Rowdy, right?
Sure.
So something like that, like three goats, right? Like that's where my mind first went. That was my introduction. That was mine. But then, to deny modern sports cards is to deny the future of the hobby.
Yep.
If you don't, the kids that like to collect now, they will tip their hat and respect years prior, but they have their GOAT. It's why I don't argue Jordan or LeBron anymore.
Right.
I won't argue that. It's a silly thing to argue. So it's the same thing. And if you're really a wrestling fan, which I think, if you're a collector, you should have some wrestling cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get into that in just a minute.
We will. But if you're a fan of wrestling, you should like them all. If you're a real fan of wrestling, you shouldn't be talking bad on a constant basis about any of them. You don't have to buy them. You don't have to invest your money. That's your prerogative. And that's just that's what I would say. Own the narrative. You can't put together a diverse collection if you only collect vintage sports cards, or vintage wrestling cards. It just doesn't have it. And technically, 82 All-Stars isn't really vintage. Menko from Japan are vintage are vintage wrestling cards. If we're I
think most people just reference I even see some people like speak of 90s as vintage in wrestling just because of the lack of wrestling cards produced.
Kind of is.
Yeah.
It kind of is. Unfortunately, it falls under the mass production problems that they've had. But that doesn't take away from making something valuable or rare because of condition. There some of those cards try to find a 85 or 87 O-Peachy in Gem Mint.
Oh yeah.
Hard to find.
Yeah.
Right? Like incredibly hard to find. Yeah, I mean, to me, if you were to ask me, just humble old Corey, Hulk Hogan's rookie card is 1985.
Yeah, because of the pack
it's a Topps card.
Yep.
It's a Topps card. That, to me, that's like saying, if Mickey Mantle if someone cut a picture out of an old magazine of Mickey Mantle before he was 1951 Bowman card, and it was a 1949 New York baseball, is that his rookie card? No. So it has to, in terms of the hobby, what we generally think of, it is that, it came out of a pack, right? I mean, I'm not being crazy when I say that. I don't think so.
No, that's what the standard is for most definitions. I just think personally, maybe this is me taking your Bruce Springsteen stance that you just took. I don't care about rookie cards anymore. Like, I just go after the cool stuff, what I think is awesome. And if it's a rookie, cool. If it's not, but considered a rookie, but like, to be honest, I'd rather have a Hogan Gold Prism than an 85 Hogan.
Hands down.
That's what I'm talking, and that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
And here's a good example. I won't. He's not in. He doesn't have a horse in this race. But there's a great follow. And I'm sorry if I butcher it. If he even sees it, MK Sports Cards.
Yeah,
he's got an amazing collection, right? A great guy. Ridiculous collection, and a really good guy. So he's a big Jordan collector. But he's got some nice wrestling too. He's like one of the few that has the Hogan Gold Prism. And he said, I've never been more interested. I talked to him about it. He was like, I've never been more interested in the Hulk Hogan card than that. That is an outside, if you will, collector That's what he wants. And I've met him. He's not a 19-year-old kid. You know, he doesn't like 2022 Prism because it's the set that came out his junior year of high school. No,
Right.
that's not how it goes at all. So I hope that kind of gets erased out of the hobby, and it's kind of just becomes one. Sports got to go through that. The old guys at the shows that are only those vintage tables, they don't get mad at the guy selling the new boxes anymore because they know eventually the more Aaron Judges get pulled, the more Mickey Mantles they buy.
Right. That's a great way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to fandom. We've kind of sprinkled it in throughout here. And it's one thing that we've constantly questioned. And like, I'm still going to question this, but put a little bit of a spin on it. We've talked about why wrestling cards, like, why are they not collected by wrestling fans? Where it seems like mini sports card, like there's so many more fans of sports that actually, or Pokemon or whatever. The fan of the IP is a fan of the cards and collects the cards. Why do you think we haven't seen, and we have an increase, especially last year with the major Upper Deck and Panini releases, but we're still not seeing a lot? Like, I recently was like Karrion Kross has a new MLW figure that they put out for pre-order, and it's like $40. And there were people saying, well, this is way too expensive. And I'm like, is this why people don't collect cards? Because, they think $40 is expensive for a figure. Have they seen some of the prices of these other cards? So what do you think the kind of disconnect is between some of the wrestling fans that aren't collecting and why they're not getting into cards?
It's a really good question and a really good, breakdown study, something to talk about. If you were to ask me, because you're right, last couple of years that the buy-in has certainly been bigger, but what we don't know is how many are true wrestling fans that just started collecting cards, or that were card collectors that realized they loved wrestling.
Well, and you just gave an example of that with MK Sports.
Exactly. So that's one. So the other is why, and I think personally, that direct to, if you break it down, but like direct to consumer marketing hasn't really been there for sports cards with wrestling. If you go to baseball games, football games, there's usually a Topps banner somewhere, or Panini instant rewards, or even back in the day, Upper Deck, and a lot of those things, community outreach programs, always being listed in price guides. Wrestling was never been listed in price guides. So things like that, where you could, I think the hard part is people know that don't collect cards. They see the articles and news or hear about how valuable sports cards can be. I don't think they've ever heard how valuable some wrestling cards are, and how valuable a lot of us think that they will be in the future.
Right.
I think there's also, there's struggle on buy-in because of what wrestling is, and the fact that it's not a sporting event in the sense of what a lot of people consider a sporting event. There is some predetermination,
Sure.
all things like that. We know that. It's also not something that any major American sports book takes bets on. So you could place bets on the WWE. There are places to do it, but no major credentialed sports book takes bets because of that. So there's another audience that kind of doesn't get introduced, which is what happened during COVID. That's why sports cards blew up, is the sports cards investors couldn't bet on sports. So this was the next best thing. So I think that's part is direct to consumer marketing, which Panini will change. I think that's probably part of what Vince is negotiating as he's come back, right? I'm sure Panini's at that table, and I'm sure Fanatics is nipping on the backside of that. So that's what I would think. It's also too consistency of product. Since that had been such an issue, I love Topps Fully Loaded, right? I love that product. That's not a product in any other sport. That's not it's not a product that every hobby shop sees. That's
Right.
part of what we're seeing now. But if you want to get into collecting and you go into a hobby store and you want to buy a box, there's some wrestling. We're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting there. We're in the first year. That's the other part with what Ultra Modern is. We had our first Panini Prism product, regardless of what any of us want to say. That's what it all revolves around. Right.
Yep.
It all kind of grows from there. And wrestling flubbed it when they released it. Right. I know we had alluded to some product releases that we liked or didn't like or things along those lines. And, the industry got too involved and they blew up prices. And it made the first release kind of fall flat on its face, and the prices of boxes dropped, even though for collectors, we love it because now I can get a box of Prism.
And I'll still make the argument, again, we'll just go back to that Hogan Gold. I mean, there's one out there that we know of. So that means there's still some in boxes. The secondary market on pretty much all the low-end parallels of Prism have, even for like low-end talent, they're way outpacing what a box would cost you if you pulled it. So I don't understand. Like, I think it was, I've said this before, I think it was the wrestling collectors who came in and they thought that base Prism and silver Prism cards were going to, pay off their house. And they just don't know that in all the other aspects of Prism that have ever been released, those become dollar cards real quick. And so they just wrote the whole line off as that. Meanwhile, savvy people are still going out there collecting who they want in the parallels that they want, whatever that is. And we're just seeing I bought right when everything was crashing, I found a Solo Sokoa red because I called it the Bloodline parallel, and I bought it out of China for $8 shipped. And I'm like, I'll keep doing this while everybody's trashing the product.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. I think that's exactly, everyone, I think we forget too, Golden Auction just housed a Rock PSA 8 Gold Prism, just got $12,000 in a public sale. No more of that. Oh, I heard he paid this, right? That's what really needs to happen. Is some of these sales that we know have gone down between collectors. If they some could happen on a public sale domain so people could recognize the value of what some of these get. Then that'll happen eventually again. Like I just said, $12,000 for PSA 8.
Yeah.
Okay, that's in those boxes. I guarantee not all 10 of them have been pulled. Wait until it's 2025 and you can't find 2022 WWE Prism boxes or cards. Prying wrestling cards out of wrestling cards collectors.
I was just going to open this up.
Do you know what it reminds me of?
Let's hear it.
Charizard.
Yeah.
Okay, and here's why. I know people hate that analogy, but if we're going to talk money, it's important because we never get mad at it, right?
Right.
And I remember when height of COVID and all these, Michael Jordan rookie cards were reaching $170,000 for PSA 10. That same year, Charizard PSA 10s had broken records. And what's interesting is, don't quote me on these numbers, but 200, let's call it, I think it's like 160 or something, whatever, Jordan rookie cards, let's call it 200, and let's call it, 100 PSA, let's call it the same, 200 PSA 10 first edition Charizards. What's funny is the Jordan rookie cards were selling every single week. There was a PSA 10 Jordan rookie card in one of the big auction houses, a new one getting listed, and one guy would buy it for $60,000 and they made it 80, and then it turned in 80, and then it just reached its peak of wherever it was. In that time span, 2 PSA 10 Charizards exchanged hands in public markets with record-breaking prices. There were tons of collectors, 25-year-old kids didn't get their careers going yet, and they've got a $500,000 Charizard card they won't sell.
Right.
That's how it is with wrestling collectors, more so than a lot of sports card collectors.
Yep.
try. Good luck.
I've
And it
tried. I'm
does.
still trying. I'll go at somebody for, and there's been numerous times, so I can't just say one card or one situation. But I've offered like a cash and trade that's like 4x the comps of whatever they have, and they're like, nope.
Because
Yeah.
you're so right. And it's because there's an emotional investment in being a wrestling fan
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have from sports. And I played sports my whole life, college, love sports, Eagles fan,
Yep.
still do all that. But there's something that gets in you from wrestling that you were emotionally invested in, where hate is hate, like you couldn't
Yep.
believe it. But we collect the guys we hated. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, can you imagine that? That's the power of collecting. Think about that.
Right.
I can't, you will not, I don't have a Tom Brady card in my sports card collection. I won't own one. Okay. I just don't like the guy.
Right.
I couldn't stand so many of these wrestlers that, like, how many times Kane aggravated me when
Yep.
he first came out? I wanted to pull my hair out. Undertaker was the GOAT to me.
Right.
I have one of the nicer Kane collections that probably anybody's put together because I hated him so much and then turned to love him. But it's that power, that emotion, that passion that wrestling fans have. It
Right.
transcends into cards once we get them. It's hard to pry them out of our hands.
And once that fandom sinks into you and kind of transitions into the cards, like I just don't think it ever goes away.
You can't.
No.
You can't. Every bit of that emotional attachment that you had watching, that memory you have, now lies in that sports, or in that card, amongst your sports cards, amongst your baseball, your basketball. Wrestling gets its own box for me.
Right.
I mean, that's just how it is. It's a different passion. And the money, for some reason, when something costs something, it doesn't blow your mind away as much to me, because it's like, oh yeah, I love that too. I get it. Somebody
Right.
else, I understand.
Right.
So yeah, it's a good point.
So we talk about the fandom of wrestling, and I think we're slowly, I saw some clips at it was at, well, I think it was a picture at an AEW event where they actually had blasters at the merch stand. And I think that's something else that is interesting about wrestling that is not really prevalent in sports anymore. And that is, if someone wants to base set collect, if they're a kid and they just want to collect their favorite wrestlers and they base card form or an insert form, they're not really shunned and they're not really considered junk like I see a lot in the sports card world. If you want to speak on that real quick and how maybe that helps get more people into the hobby too. I don't know. I'm just kind of talking out loud here, but it's something I thought of.
No, I think that's a really good thought, actually. And you're right. And I think that kind of ties into the passion that we had is it's understandable, right? I have trouble putting base cards of wrestler. They go in the same box that, they get sleeved. They go in a top loader. I have two little kids, a son and daughter. They love cards. They love wrestling.
That's great.
Yeah. So, those are theirs to get mad at each other and, do wrestling moves. That's all part of it, but you're right. And that's really exciting to hear at the AEW event, because Upper Deck, for all the hate that they got from all sports card collectors for a long time, they grind.
Yep.
And their grind, I really like some of their product for AEW, and I'm happy. It's another thing, we get to collect different leagues. As opposed to sports, nobody is the NFL. You got one choice.
Right.
So that's another part. But you're right. You're not anything in your. I think it's because most of wrestling collectors, like we said earlier, we don't collect really for value. I mean, it's your money spent. Don't waste it. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying it doesn't. Nobody says, oh, if you buy a card and it loses half its value. I always tell myself, it only loses half its value if you sell it.
Right.
If you don't sell it, you didn't lose anything.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I have personally never bought a wrestling card specifically. Like if I got something in a bulk buyout or a collection trade or something like that, that's different. But if I was
Sure.
specifically seeking out a card, I've never purchased a card thinking, oh, well, I can make, 10x this in 5 years or anything. Like, I just want it because I
Never.
want it.
You're exactly right. And the only time I sell them is when I'm looking to buy something else.
Yeah, there you
You know,
go.
it becomes that currency of collecting. No, that's a good point too. I don't think I've ever bought a card. So I'm going to buy this card because I think it's going to go up in
Right.
value. In sports, that's not the truth. That's what we all did for a long time.
Yep.
You know, it was you had your PC box, and then now it's all just PC.
All together. Yeah.
Yeah. If something gets sold, it's because I have my eye on something else. I sold maybe 25% of my sports card collection to start my wrestling collection. That's what I just I liquidated cards. People were like, you're crazy. And here we are, a year and a half later, and it's the most fun I've had in collecting.
Let's touch on that really quick. I think that's another talking point that I've mentioned before is a struggle. You don't see, and it's something you don't see in sports cards as much, but you see it all the time in wrestling is, I really want that, but I can't afford it. And it's the people that are a little bit afraid to use the equity that they built up in their collection to get that grail or get that gold or black or whatever it is. How do you personally navigate that? And because like I'm all about doing what you're doing and self-sustaining hobby with using that equity. But there are a lot of people that just cannot let go of that. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm just saying that using the equity in your cards you've got in your box to get something else that you really want is really the way to go. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'll give credit to my wife.
That's good.
At first, I'll give credit to my wife at first for saying, at first it was, I can't believe we're spending money on these cards. And then it became fun. And she knows more about cards than most collectors do. I'll tell you that right now.
That's good.
And we like to open them. And then there were times in our long relationship together where we were in a bind, made some cash.
Yep.
She bought in, she loved it. But the idea we had together was, can you self-sustain, from time to time? You got 2 kids, and what I realized was, I look at it, there are cards I'll never sell. Mm-hmm. There's some cards it really doesn't matter. I mean, everything has its price, but there's just some that I'm just totally not interested in. That said, if you see a card, the kind of the way I go about it is, have you made money? If your jump is astronomical, which a lot of us had this dilemma a year or 2 ago, is something that was $500 was selling for $5,000, right? The answer to that, I have a simple answer. The answer to that is sell it. Okay. If something has made 400%, you sell the damn card. And the reason is because with that money, I'll give you an example, 79 Magic Johnson card or I'll give you a wrestling example, the 82 All-Star Andre card. I'm going to own another one of them. I sold it, but I'm going to own another one at some point. Readily available.
Yep.
Okay. So you have to look, am I going to say sell all your 101s because of another? Right. That's a different discussion that you have to have with yourself. But also too, let's say you pay $1,000 for something, right? And another card comes and you got to move it and it gets $600, but you owned it for 2 years. That means you paid $400 to own one of the coolest cards in your collection for 2 years. Right. Some people would say that's stupid. Some people would say the enjoyment alone makes it valuable. And if at the end of the day, your personal spreadsheet in your mind is even and green, who cares what it says?
It's a fun process to go through.
Exactly. Everybody has to know nobody hits 100% of the time. Nobody loses 100% of the time. And what wrestling afforded me was the availability to not care about that.
Yeah.
I don't care. These cards are not moving hands at a rate where I'm going to lose a bunch. I just have to be honest, have made a bunch though from when I've sold them, just because, wrestling cards aren't the ones people, all of the cards that have been made, it's what's there. There's not a bunch of different options. So for me, it kind of comes down to, if you find a new need to have card, go through your collection and find the ones that you realize you haven't looked in your box that much. Or if you still do look at them in the box, is the juice worth the squeeze? Do you check? Are you going to make money on it? Has it appreciated? Do you look at it as an asset, or do you look at it as a collectible? Well, you have to look at these things. If you look at it as an asset, is it time to sell? It's how your personal build comes out. But as I said before, I can't get mad at my money.
Right.
That's how I've had it. If I sell something and I love that card, I used to have think of see, I haven't sold many wrestling cards I get, but there's plenty of sports cards that I missed that one.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think back, well, it was the right financial move, and there's nothing wrong with cashing out your asset at any time. There's no problem for anybody to do that. I didn't want to sell my Hulk Hogan PMG. I didn't want to, but I couldn't get mad at my money. And what it turned into was other things, that's, and I think that's important. And that's that cyclical nature of collecting that's so much fun, is you can keep it going, with your XP points. That's basically what we're doing, right? And it's just using XP points.
Transition off of this, I hadn't planned it. You're talking about the PMG. I was actually offered double what the last one sold in the golden auction for mine, and I turned it down because it's like my favorite card in the collection. So I'm not willing to do what you did on that. And like, we both understand each other.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. Because I know the feeling that you still get to open your box and look at that I don't have. That I was happy at the time for the sale of what it did was, like 1,000% of what I paid for it. So it was worth it.
You got to own one, like you're part of that club.
Exactly. And now that you say it, I'm definitely still jealous that you have that card.
Well, it's what you said. I was looking at it and I was like, and mine's a BGS 9, whatever on that. But
that's what mine was too.
I was like, I just don't know that I'm ever going to see one of these again, whether it's a raw or in this grade or whatever. Like, they're just, even though there's 125 of them, they're so hard to find. There's
not 125 of them.
Yeah, I'm convinced that as well.
So employee cards, the way that they worked, and I have firsthand experience. I have a family member who owned the company that printed Fleer cards in the 90s.
Okay.
So had plenty of uncut sheets in our basement given to us by this family member. But the way employees go is, a lot of most upper deck employees don't collect sports cards. So, my grandmother worked for this company back in the 90s. She didn't know. So if you give her a Hulk Hogan card, she'd go, "Oh, that's cool." And she'd probably put it on her lamp on her desk, and it would get greased and spilled coffee on it. And the fact there was 125, they went out in employee Christmas packages. That's basically how it went, is you got this set. And over the years, some have stumbled into hobby shops where they go, "Oh, I have these from the time I went." There's not 125 in circulation. Nobody's ever going to find a new one. It's just iconic. It's a very iconic card that a wrestler got in on that set, considering who else is with it, with Tiger and Mike and Rory and Oscar De La Hoya. Yeah, I mean, it's just iconic. And I think long term, that's the type of card that headlines an auction. I think that if you want to talk about investment money with cards, I think that's the type of card that ends up, which is why it was hard for me to let go, and why I'm happy you as my brother still got one. Because I think that's going to be something that kind of headlines. I could see it on a heritage auction, that being on the picture. I've seen the PSA 10 too.
I've seen just a picture of it. Do you know who owns it?
Yeah, it's they're a big card. They're breakers, vintage breaks.
Oh, okay.
He's a really nice guy. He puts it out, and I always ask him how much. And he always laughs and goes, "I won't price it. I won't price it." He was like, "I just know when somebody offers me something if I'm going to take it or not."
It's got to be, like, for me, I told the person that actually I had 3 different offers, and they were all like no like really good offers, more than
Mhm.
what the last one sold on Golden with. And I was like they're very respectful, and I'm like, I'm gonna need life-changing money for this. But I want to make up a scenario here and transition into your PC.
Sure.
And so, like, hypothetically, people knew you as the Hulk Hogan PMG guy. And all of a sudden, you decide to sell yours because you want to go in a different route.
Mhm.
That's another big talking point as we get into your PC here, is that wrestling card collectors seem to, like, they get pigeonholed into their lane, and then when they decide to do something else or collect something different, they get ridiculed for it, which I think is ludicrous. So
Mhm.
I want to talk about how your thought process is going into, you've already talked a little bit about faction building. So let's talk about your current PC, what you're doing, and maybe how your mind has shifted, and anywhere you want to go with that. And then you can show
Sure.
off all your stuff as well.
Sure, man. Yeah, I mean, I brought a few. So I kind of went through this journey of discovering, because I kind of came in when I really hit it hard. It was like 2021 Transcendent had just been released, right?
So good.
Gorgeous.
Yep.
A really important set, a set that I think people forget. That was $12,000 a box to get a box. There's 50 boxes or 53 boxes, whatever it is, and that's all that was made. And so I was excited for Panini. I was excited to see what the product was, but at that time, I fell in love with 2014 and 2015 Topps Chrome.
Yep.
I think they're my favorite sets. I think that they are, again, we talk about, short printed overall. They are, but to me, the gold refractor, I love gold prisms. Not hating them
Most
at
people
all.
do.
Love them.
Yep.
Love them. Love that they're out of 10. A gold refractor is my king.
Okay.
And it's because I was a 90s. My sports card collection is mostly comprised of serial numbered 90s inserts. That's what I grew up collecting. That was my era of collecting. And the gold refractor since the late 90s and into the early 2000s has been, the thing.
Right.
Out of 50, not 10, but I fell in love with 2014. I think aesthetically, they're just gorgeous sets, strong borders. Topps could have used better direction on their poses used, and
I
that's
agree.
where
Yeah.
I think that's where I think Panini has rocked.
Yes.
Is Panini, except the Undertaker prism? That was the dumbest looking
I
outline.
like it. I think it's cool. I
Okay,
love the silhouette.
okay, now hold on. I'm gonna give you right now the one that where they did it right. I love the silhouette. The mezzanine,
Yep.
select
It's
is
even
how
better.
it's gorgeous. That
Yep.
card is so pretty. I love
Yep.
that card.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and they, I'll show you one and kind of goes along that. So, and again, you might not be able to see it too well because the background.
There you go. Right there. Up.
Right here.
There you go. Right there.
Okay.
It's kind of blurring it out. There you go.
So this is the Undertaker 2014 Topps Chrome. I think I can unblur this background. And this card, this is a pop 4. I'll put it down. I'll fix that one second. But it's a pop 4, and that card's him doing a leg drop, which is cool.
Isn't
right?
that like Mohawk too?
Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Right. So great card, PSA 10, pop 4. I actually just acquired this card not too long ago. This was one that had eluded me for a long time. I actually got it from Brett. He let it go, stacking slabs himself. Great guy, great collector. And it's on Randy Orton too, which is always cool. That's
Right.
the other part, right? Is who it's against. And whenever I get a Undertaker, that's just like part of my faction or rivalry builds that I do. Whenever there's an Undertaker, I have to get a Kane. So with the, I
It's
can't.
good matched up together.
Don't they look good like
Yep.
that? And I love that, on the backs too, the Undertaker's a blue and Kane's is a red background. I think Kane's got one of the best poses on this card.
For being an action shot, it's not bad.
For being and it's mid choke slam. When your iconic move is being displayed, it's always a good thing.
Right.
So this set, 2014 Topps Chrome, I think personally, I think it's still incredibly undervalued. I think that the fact that, a Shawn Michaels gold refractor you can get for $500 is a steal. I think that guy long term is a great purchase in this hobby. And again, another one too. If anybody follows me, they know this is kind of like my guy overall. He's probably my favorite, the great Mick Foley. I love these two also because I personally graded these and they both got 10s.
That's an
So
awesome
really,
feeling.
oh, it really is, man. It's hard to
Yeah.
beat even 9s these days.
Right.
It's thrilled with these cards. But these are the ones that are all limited out of 50, and these I'll give you a little dig on how, and I'm sure we've a lot of in the wrestling community have heard 2014 Topps Chrome is about 250 hobby cases made. The way they got this math is when hobby boxes have shown up, which is rare, and $1,500 to $2,500 if you can find one, they almost always you pull 2 gold refractors out of that single box. So extrapolating above my pay grade to how it goes, if there's
Right.
50 and then about 250 cases, which is again insane. And 2015 also is one that was lower also, probably not as much. There was more retail. I think there was barely any retail in 2014 too. These things sat on Target shelves in 2014. And then you go into 2015, this is the first of consecutive sets available for Topps. I mean, this set is loaded.
Doesn't get any better than that.
Right, man. I mean, I just got this in yesterday. I had a PSA 8 for a long time, and I just upgraded to the PSA 9. There are no 10s of this card, but this is Hulk Hogan's only gold refractor.
And it's a perfect image to represent him and what he is.
It really is, brother. It really is, the rip and everything. One of the things that I really like about this card too, or this set, both of them, is that they're Topps. I think people sleep and forget on Topps flagship for wrestling. They forget the base Topps sets. I have done a massive dig on some of these cards over the last 6 months. I've really bought a lot of them and found a lot of them, serial numbered ones. I mean, they're loaded, and what you get in some of them is the ability to match if you can find them. So
That's
what's cool about the flagships, so it's not the refractor, but these are out of 10. These are serial numbered out of 10, the gold papers. And I buy those up whenever I can too. Whenever I get a gold refractor, I try to match if you can find them out of 10. Again, that's people do that in sports cards. You can do it here too. But yeah, the Topps flagship cards are serial numbered. They have one of ones. Their odds were even longer for one of ones than they were in Chrome sets. So don't sleep on those either. You can find the faction builds and the parallels a different way. And as I went through those sets, as Panini started to be released, and we all went through Panini, prisms, and I buy all the gold prisms I like. I've got the Mick Foley shimmer and gold, and the Kevin Nash. There's a couple ending soon that I'm not going to say on here. Nobody hears them.
Yeah, we don't want anybody to steal them from you.
That's right. But then I went back and did what I did in sports card and look at some oddities. Some cards that were like, oh, really? That was a card? I can't believe I forgot that. And it really ended up in one of my favorite cards in my collection. People forget that this set even exists. These are just super hard to find. And that's the 2001 Fleer WWF before they had to change. And this was the War Booty parallel. Yep. And it is on card auto.
Always a great signature.
Great. You're right. Great signature. Old signature. Mm-hmm. I have his 94 action pack auto at PSA right now.
I got to get mine in there soon.
So just be prepared. Pre-1996, PSA's auto authentication is like stringent and very long. Mine's been there for 4 months and it hasn't come back yet. So it might take a little while. But yeah, this set also is home to this is the War Booty parallel in my box. I didn't take it out. Is the Steve Austin has an auto in there
Right.
too. The Insignia 316 hand numbered out of 500. Those are really cool, really condition sensitive cards. Like this is a 7, and man, was I lucky to get that near mint, to find a near mint one.
Yeah, people, just as a quick side note before we keep going on your stuff, I think too many people like put too like we again, it's a difference in wrestling and sports cards. Like with sports cards, people freak out over the rarest card if it's a PSA 6. That same rarity of a card could be in a 6 or a 5 or an 8 or whatever in wrestling. And there's this like logic that I've seen that people are like, well, if it's not a 10, I don't want it. And I think people are missing the boat on a lot of opportunity that way.
And they're gonna miss that. You're so right, because a lot of these cards, there's never gonna be a PSA 10 for a lot of the reasons. If anyone's listening right now, rewind back to the beginning when we were talking about it explains it, right? I mean, a lot of these cards were thrown in binders, not taken care of. If they were pulled, good luck. I mean, you can't. A lot of these, the new stuff, sure. You wanna save for a select gold 10. I get it. And if anybody, that I'm going to show a couple cards from that set, and I'd love to talk about that set for a couple minutes because it's so important.
Yeah,
it really is. The next one I'll show, we kind of touched base on this too. A lot of the wrestling community, and I think a lot of outside wrestling community, was looking at a big eBay auction last night of the Ric Flair 2006 Heritage Chrome Superfractor. I'm the proud owner of the Shawn Michaels.
And is that one a numbered one or an unnumbered?
Numbered, brother.
Cool.
So and that's a good people. These cards can be non-serial numbered. My understanding is very much like the sports cards of the 90s. They were backdoored potentially. I haven't been able to confirm from people that say that they pulled them not serial numbered. I don't believe that's the case, but make sure you look for the serial numbers on the back of these. If you don't want the serial numbered one, they're just as gorgeous.
Either way, it's another example of what we spoke about how it's numbered to 25, and let's hypothetically double that with the unnumbered ones. Good luck finding hardly any of the 50. Yeah.
You're exactly right. And again, it's heritage sets, which are heritage.
They've gotten a little bit more popular recently, but they still don't get the love or popularity of some of the other chrome.
You're right, which is a shame because the chrome inserts in these sets are gorgeous. I have the foil fractor from 2021 Heritage, the 1 of 1 of Triple H, and that card is one of my favorite cards. It's gorgeous. And they're long odds. I think that's why people get frustrated. For 90s collectors like me, I love the tough pulls. Yeah. I love not getting them in every box.
Right.
But yeah, this one, and I actually just the other day, I have the Batista of this too, the 2006 Topps Chrome WWE Heritage or Heritage Chrome. I also have a Jimmy Snuka of 2000. Yeah, really good. His is a 2008 though, but yeah, super cool card. I love that. And then I'll show this one. This was right when I first got in. I didn't get this. I fell in love with this card. I'm very happy, and I feel very blessed to own one of these at all. I think they're the most gorgeous wrestling card ever made, and that is the Top Transcendent Superfractor autos.
I know. I got the Karrion Kross. I know exactly what you mean.
I know you do. His a beautiful card on that. The poses are good. They're just. This is.
You don't understand them until they're in hand, and it's just like
it's the best way to put it.
Yeah,
it's the best way to put it. I like them in their original case, but I did buy this graded, and it's 9.5, 9.5, 10.10. So like it's not like
you can't beat it.
And it's Kane new mask choke slamming Braun Strowman, which is pretty cool because they're both beefy dudes. So that is a cool shot. That is a set. If you're a serious collector and you want to get into wrestling cards and you want to buy a serious wrestling card, buy a Transcendent Superfractor.
Any name.
It doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
I want the Street Profits one that's on eBay. I want that card. It's one of the few duels that they have. It's just they're it's a super important set because as we've seen, at least this year, Panini's going to release high end via the Chronicles as Chronicles inserts. We're not going to have a National Treasures wrestling product. So this right now, at least, is far and away the most valuable and highest end wrestling product that's ever been. Everybody should have Transcendent wrestling cards, not just wrestling collectors. That is something that guys at tables, at shows, everybody should have Transcendent autos on their tables. Everybody needs some of those in their collection.
Yep, that's like it'll be interesting. We don't have to talk about this, but it'll be interesting, a parallel between like that and like the AEW metal PMGs when those come out. Like, it is a set that transcends, no pun intended, transcends the talent on the card because of the importance.
So really, really good point. You're absolutely right. As a Cody Rhodes guy, I don't think he'll still be in that product. Yeah. He might be. But those there's certain sets that when you get into it, and I've talked to sports card guys at shows before, and I've said, do you realize how fast a Hulk Hogan would sell in your case? Like, you need to be having these cards. The next show they had them, and when I would walk back around, they're like, sold that gold Hogan. Yeah, I know you did. Of course you did. If you have Khabib and Conor McGregor in your case, there's no reason you should. And Pokemon.
I was just getting ready to say Charizard or Bulbasaur or something. Yeah.
And so be it. I'm not hating. I'm not hating on any of that. Right. But there are similarities. The persona of a wrestler can't get arrested for domestic abuse. He can, but the persona can't, right? The Undertaker can't die. So he can, but the Undertaker, that persona can never be. If you're a babyface, there's still Chris Benoit collectors.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So he gets huge money,
right?
So I found that interesting. And the last one was show, and this kind of ties together two things. One, I think it's the greatest Panini did in wrestling. It's up there in the greatest wrestling sets that's ever been released, and that's the 2022 Panini Select.
You're not the only one that said that.
I mean, it really is overall, I think, the best set. The way the cards look are gorgeous. You get what Panini Select is, the different levels, and they do interesting things throughout the set. Like faction builds are some of the best you could do in this set. I'm a Mick Foley guy. So Mick Foley is the concourse. And then you get Cactus Jack is the premier. Mankind is the ringside. And Dude Love is the mezzanine. That's so cool.
Right.
So I have that built out from greens through tie-dyes. I have
so cool.
all of their personalities. I love it. And I have dropped off a PSA today, the Dude Love mezzanine black 1 of 1 and the Mick Foley black 1 of 1. They will be graded. So
nice.
Very excited for that. And this is a good example of it too. I think this guy's going to be huge. I know some people are not fans, some are fans. I'm a massive fan. If you follow me, you know this card. But this is the Black Select Cody Rhodes Black Prism 1 of 1.
Unbelievable.
This is his first Panini card in general. He's not in Panini Prism. He's not in Revolution, which was the second. This is the third, and he only has one level. He only has ringside. Something interesting about how this card was acquired. I knew the gentleman that pulled it. He was not a sports card collector, really. A wrestling fan. Bought a couple boxes on a whim, and this is what he pulled. Pretty cool, right?
Right. Yeah.
Talked to him for a while, and then I hit the green prism of Cody in a break, and thought to myself, oh, "You got a chance since you know where it is." So I do have the rainbow. I will get this graded at some point, but who cares? It's just so pretty. Who cares? God forbid it comes back as 7, and I hate it. But I just keep it here. Who cares? Yeah. I'm not selling it.
Right.
And then part of the power, you get his dad
Mashing it up. Yep.
Isn't that cool?
Yep.
I mean, there's really just not too many sets.
I'm such a diehard Dusty Rhodes fan. I did that with Prism. I got the American Dream, and then I got the Common Man's Gold, the orange. Like I was
I love the oranges.
Right. Yeah. I just thought it was what you were doing, putting it's been interesting, these like the faction collecting or what you just showed. Like I think that is an interesting way that people can start collecting and kind of get out of the rut that they're in, or if they're not able to do a certain thing, like just have fun with it.
Have fun. How about this? How about you pick your favorite event, your favorite WWE event, and go buy all the champions.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Every Royal Rumble champion. Here's my Royal Rumble. Here's my Hell in a Cell champions list. Here's my tag team That's kind of what I'm in the process of. I've Brothers of Destruction was like my thing. So you pair them all together, and then you can. It's the imagery that's in your minds and the fandom that's in your hearts. That's what lives on in these sports cards. And you're right. It would be. I challenge anybody to show me a better collection of Super Bowl champion quarterbacks, right? That gets repetitive. Let's see how far you can go back and have I have a card from every WrestleMania event since one.
Right.
Incredible. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
So kind of closing out, you can wrap this, like your style of collecting, I think, has been pretty inspirational to people because it's so different. And we've covered so much ground today. So what do you think the future of wrestling cards are, and what kind of advice, based on your experience coming into wrestling cards, within the last few years, what's your advice for the collectors, and where do you see wrestling cards going, like mainstream popularity wise?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to even answer. I think wrestling cards have a really beautiful future in the hobby. And part of the reason I think that is because it's still unscathed. I mean, we're having some of these baseline, beautiful conversations here today over the last hour that you couldn't have about sports cards. Those questions have been sometimes badly answered, but answered. We still own the narrative in wrestling, and it's not going anywhere. And I'm sorry, I am a football collector too. I'm sorry to all other football collectors. Outside of North America, you're worth nothing. Wrestling has value around the world.
There's another basketball card parallel right there for you.
The parallels between basketball and wrestling are bigger than any. I'm telling you, they're bigger than people even understand.
I had never really put it together, and you just blew my mind today with that.
It's true, though, right? I mean, I think about it often. And remember this, I've talked about this before, too. Last year, I remember watching the Super Bowl, and at the end of the Super Bowl, they were trying to get interviews. This was when the Rams won. They were trying to get interviews of everybody, of the Rams players. They couldn't find all the starters because they were off to the side celebrating by putting on the belt and getting pictures. Football players.
I would have also been surprised if you told me they were trying to find The Rock too, since he did the intro to that.
You really think that they didn't have more pictures with The Rock than anybody else? And who introduced the Super Bowl? Right, The Rock. So, we always say rock stars want to be actors and actors want to be rock stars. That's fine. They all want to be professional wrestlers.
Absolutely.
Everybody's a fan of it. You can't hide from it. You can't. It's here. It's not going anywhere. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's my opinion. I think it's going to go huge. And if you want to get started, honestly, follow some stuff. If you're on Instagram, follow some stuff on Instagram. And ask the community. Don't be fooled by who you think is this, and look on the pages. Who's got a bunch of different stuff? And I'll just give you your names. Aside from, who's on this call right now, guys like Stacking Slabs and Gelman and Drake. Just go ask them a question. They're not here for anything other than just giving you good perspectives. That's what the wrestling hobby has, is they have good perspectives, generally really good people. Just don't ask to buy their cards because we're probably not going to give them up. That's usually what happens.
All right, man, I can't thank you enough for all your time today, and let everybody know where they can find you so they can check out your cool PC and ask you questions about your cards or just cards in general if they've got anything.
Thanks so much. Anybody, you can follow me along at Apocalypse Cards. It's Apocalypse_cards on Instagram. And that's really the only spot I'm at, but I'm on all day. So feel free to reach out at any time. I'm always here to help. And thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for all you do for this hobby, man.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and thank you for your time. Like this whole basketball parallel thing's just blown my mind now. I'm gonna be thinking about it all day. But yeah, thanks for just telling your story about your journey in the hobby, and how I'm hoping that the continuation of these interviews that I can continue to do on this channel can just help expand the perspective, I'll say, of wrestling card collectors. And then maybe it brings in some other people as they want to get into wrestling cards, and this interview is a good jumping off point for them. So thanks everybody for watching. Corey, thanks again for coming on. We'll see you. Thanks again to Corey for coming on the show today. Make sure to give him a follow on Instagram. He's got a great PC you can check out. And again, feel free to shoot him any questions you have about anything to do with wrestling cards or collecting. And I hope his commentary on the hobby, and there was so much information to absorb. Maybe you want to go back and watch this again and take some notes or something. I know it was a little bit longer of a conversation, but we could have kept going and going and going because there were so many great topics to touch on. But I hope it inspired you to maybe collect a certain way, maybe change your mind on something, or think about something a little bit different. And before you get out of here, make sure to check the links in the show notes to all the ways you can help show your support for my content. I've also got Corey's Instagram link down there to check out, so it's an easy follow. Just click on it. But make sure to check out the show notes so you can check out all the other stuff I'm into, the podcast, Worlds Collide podcast, Wrestling with Cards Patreon community, my eBay store, and much more. I thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. Please share it, hit the subscribe button, give me a like, and spread the word about the channel. Spread the word about wrestling cards. We need more wrestling fans collecting the wrestling cards because it's fun, people. And until next time, click the videos on the screen wherever they are in the ethos for more great wrestling card content. We'll see you.